Aha! We're live!
Spoilercast.
Podcast, videocast. I always, right now, I write pod/videocast. I'm just like, darn it, there needs to be just like an all-inclusive word for what these are, you know?
I think we can just leave it as podcast, right? Because it still counts.
Yeah, true. You're watching the video version of,
Yeah.
otherwise, like, oral experience, I guess.
Yeah.
Because we're just sitting here. Anyways, you've tuned in for our Gone Girl Spoilercast Conversation, as we're calling it. Basically, we just want to talk about this film on so many different levels, some of which will inevitably touch upon your review, your written review, which people can find on 30andnerdy.com. But we want to dig even deeper into everything that made this film what it is, you know, just like this very discussion-worthy piece of film, piece of entertainment, piece of life.
Yeah. I found it was a really difficult film to review without spoiling the crap out of it, and so I tried a slightly different approach to my review style. Whether or not it worked is sort of up in the air, but I felt like there was a lot that I wanted to discuss and get into about the film, or movie, as it were, because it was actually shot digitally, so film is sort of a misnomer.
Was it really? I couldn't tell.
Yeah,
Huh.
well, Fincher hasn't shot any films since Zodiac. But anyway, there's a lot to say about Gone Girl. I found it to be far more interesting than what I was expecting from a pop thriller, but I should have expected more because it was David Fincher. So.
Yeah. Before we go any further, I am Matt Sternad for 30andnerdy.com. You can reach me on Twitter at 30andnerdy. Myself and 30andnerdy's Gina at that address with 30 spelled out. And across from me, and really the heart of this presentation here for the evening is...
I'm Scott William Hannon. You can find me at SW Hannon on Twitter, as well as a handful of other social media sites, Facebook, Twitter, obviously Twitter, Instagram, and recently LO, but I don't use LO too much.
Oh, I don't even know what that is. We'll have to tell me about that later.
Yeah, it's just an alternate social media app. It's really really minimalist, and it's not supposed to have any advertising, and they're not going to sell your information.
Oh, okay.
We'll see how that pans out.
Okay, cool. So yeah, and then right before we get started, obviously the name of this thing, we are putting spoiler cast. So if you have not seen this film yet, and you're planning on seeing Gone Girl, please just go and see the film. Know that you know, on a very basic level, we highly recommend it. It's definitely something you should go experience for yourself before you even, you know, subject yourself to too many trailers for it and things like that. Just go watch it and let yourself be surprised by everything that you can be surprised by in it.
Yeah, and in fact, the first thing we're going to do is just spoil the hell out of the plot. So, for those of you who aren't worried about spoilers, we're at least going to catch you up and let you know what's going on in the movie.
Yeah.
And then maybe after our podcast, you'll enjoy the discussion enough that you'll go see the movie and come back and join the discussion in the comments.
So, therefore, shall we begin with what we have here as a brief synopsis of the story, just so we can jog everybody's memories as long as our own. Okay, so in the story of Gone Girl, we have the story of Nick and Amy, a married couple. And in the story, Amy goes missing. Everybody blames Nick, her husband. And the surprising thing is that Nick doesn't seem to know anything about his wife's friends or her hobbies or her blood type or her past encounters with men who have like stalked her, you know, throughout her dating career and things like that. Also worth pointing out is that this movie takes place in Missouri.
Yes.
Right, Missouri is a word, which I thought was really interesting. That I don't know, I feel like, you know, movies that take place in like the Midwest-ish area, you know, and whatnot are kind of few and far between. You know, and growing up in you know, next door to Missouri here in Illinois, I really appreciated that. Anyways, continuing with the synopsis, the hunt for Amy begins. Nick makes some PR mistakes. He had an affair that comes out throughout you know, just
through the course of the investigation.
Yeah, exactly. Some of the clues that the investigators look into are like the they discover via crazy black light technology and whatnot that there was in fact blood on the floor in the kitchen of their home, and therefore the investigation turns to not a missing person but murder. And everyone's certain it's Nick. Everybody except for the key female investigator, and as you pointed out, Nick's twin sister. What was her name? Was it
Margot?
Margot. Yeah. So in reality, Amy, as it turns out, has, as I love that you put it, disappeared herself and framed Nick for murder, parentheses, suicide, due to abuse. And there's a question as to whether or not Amy was actually pregnant, which of course everybody gets really hot over. Everybody being the fact that this has turned into like a big, giant Missouri thing. This is not like a like a centralized hush hush little.
It becomes a media fest.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and people are taking sides and whatnot. But the murder investigation turns up some bizarre clues, kind of like last-minute insurance changes, expensive items not found in Nick's home that he may or may not have purchased, at which point, when things like that start coming up, Nick requests a lawyer. So from there, Amy, I guess he requests a lawyer, meaning that previous, to those kinds of things coming up, he was just willingly working with the police to try and help solve the disappearance of his wife, whom he was, quote unquote, very concerned with.
It's a sticky situation because he had been cooperating with the police, and all of a sudden all these really weird. He'd been cooperating with the police. The story transitions, or the investigation transitions to a murder investigation.
Mm-hmm.
They turn up these weird clues, and so he enlists the help of the sleaziest wife-killing lawyer on the planet, played by Tyler Perry.
Yeah, oh man, very on top of his game, Tyler Perry.
Yeah, no kidding.
I feel. So Amy, at this point in the film, rather than focusing on Nick and his emotional state and kind of like the clues that both do and don't point towards him having murdered his wife, we should say that the film begins doing this back and forth thing where you're seeing Nick's life played out, but then occasionally you're also seeing Amy's life play out in her plot to frame her husband, which is very cool. I think is maybe a good word for a turning point in the film where anybody who's ever watched a trailer for the film leading up to this point, the trailers are crafted in a way that they don't ever really divulge that this ever happens. People who have read the book obviously know that this is this kind of plot twist, but as kind of a first-time goer at this story, I was like, oh wow, it was one of those mind-blowing kind of moments. Anyways, in getting to see Amy's side of things, Amy enters seclusion. She's hiding out, and kind of going through everything that she's doing to frame Nick. In watching it play out via the news and things like that, she's eventually robbed, and then goes to Desi's place. Desi is played by Neil Patrick Harris. He's one of her stalker-ish ex-boyfriends in the film. At this point, on Nick's side of things, Nick's lawyer tries to get him ahead of all the bad publicity. At which point they sort of find out that Amy is in fact a manipulative psychopath, as you so adequately put it. Nick, through television interviews and whatnot, kind of very subtly taunts his wife that he now knows is alive on live television, kind of without the world realizing it, is able to hook her and just her on purpose. In the process of all this, she fakes a rape from Desi, and she kills him in one of the most intense death sequences I probably ever witnessed in film.
Yeah, that was rough.
Yeah, and then comes back to Nick, either gets pregnant and or reveals that she's pregnant. You have a question mark here because we're not entirely sure. And then sabotages Nick into saying everything that she wants him to say on television about how she actually was kidnapped, and they're happy and loving, and he is so excited to have her back, and like, wow, we're having a baby, and oh my gosh, it's so twisted.
It is a really twisted ending. I told my friend that it's the darkest Hollywood movie I've ever seen where the dark, grim ending didn't feel like a gimmick and didn't turn me off in the process. Like, I really felt like it was a strong conclusion despite being so disturbing.
It was an incredibly strong conclusion in the way that it sort of ended where it began in a lot of regards, and
Yeah.
it's one of those worlds, and therefore one of those films that I just wanted to see what happened in it, what happened with these two characters until they were either old and gray and loved and hated each other even more, and or one of them actually does end up killing the other person. You know, in the extended fan fiction, I would have
Yeah.
loved to read for
Yeah,
this.
I'd hate to see a Gone Girl 2, but I am really curious to know what would happen between these two characters in the long run.
Yeah.
And I think before we dive too far into the rest of the movie, I had also made notes to myself. I wanted to run through just some of the basic technical stuff regarding the movie. It's
Okay.
directed by David Fincher,
Yes.
who
Okay.
we know from a number of great films. He began with Alien 3. He also is attributable to Seven, although he has divorced Alien 3 as his own work. He hates it.
Yeah, I hate it too.
I mean, I respect it as early Fincher work because he's really fascinating.
Yeah.
But he also did Seven and Fight Club and Zodiac and Panic Room and The Social Network, and most recently Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, which I didn't really sit through. I didn't like the Swedish version, and I didn't really want to watch his. It's written by Gillian Flynn, who is also the novelist. She wrote the book and the movie, which is fairly unique. It's not often that they get the book writer to do the screenplay as well, although often they are consulted. But it appears here that Gillian Flynn is the primary writer for the screenplay. Cinematography is by Jeff Cronenweth, who has also worked with Fincher before on Fight Club, The Social Network, and Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. Editing is done by Kirk Baxter, who did A Curious Case of Benjamin Buttons, which is also a Fincher film that I deplored.
I didn't know that was him. Okay.
Yeah, he also did Girl with the Dragon Tattoo and Social Network. Music is by the now legendary Trent Reznor and a fellow named Atticus Ross, who is also quite popular, although I don't know him. The movie stars Ben Affleck as Nick Dunn, Rosamund Pike as Amy Dunn, Carrie Coon as Margot Dunn, Nick's sister, and Kim Dickens plays Detective Rhonda Boney, B-O-N-E-Y. I don't know if that's Boney. The lead investigator. Her partner is Officer Jim Gilpin, played by Patrick Fugit, who you will recognize as being the lead from Almost Famous. Neil Patrick Harris plays Amy's ex-boyfriend Desi, and Tyler Perry plays Tanner Bolt, the sleazy, wife-killing defender, essentially. Yeah. He's known for defending men who are accused of killing their wives. So that's just some basic stuff to get out of the way. Just so we know what we're dealing with here.
Yeah, no, that was great. That was fantastic. Okay, so next up here on the list, we're going to touch base on just kind of overall what we thought of the film, what we liked about it, and what we didn't like about it. So yeah, I'm going to toss that off to you. Did you? Okay. You seem to like it, so yeah, obviously we're already like speaking very highly of it. Just kind of overall, we began by just recommending, like, if you haven't seen it, go see it and stop listening to this. So what specifically did you like and did you dislike about it?
Just a disclaimer: my opinion is always subject to change. It's very rare that I walk out of a movie thinking that it's amazing.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
I usually don't come to that conclusion until either another view or several views, or after really long conversations with other people about it later. But I remember walking out of Gone Girl being really impressed and really excited to talk about it at length. And I would still like to see it again, although I'm a little low on money. But what I liked specifically was its treatment of what we consider to be stereotypical love and affection. The two characters, Nick and Amy, reject the sort of rom-com style, Hallmark card, romance that exists in popular culture and that we think exists in our real lives. And whether or not other people actually experience it is sort of up for debate, but in the world of the movie, it exists and it's real, and it's a thing that their friends have, and it's schmaltzy and it's kitschy, and they don't want anything to do with it. They don't want the repercussions of it. They don't want to be the gross, cute couple in public, and then they don't want to turn into the disaffected husband and the nagging wife and the people who fight about things that aren't worth fighting about, that aren't arguments in the first place. You know, at one point during the history of their relationship, and it's hard to tell whether or not this is real because so much of Amy's backstory is completely falsified. They argue about the use of a laptop that Nick buys. You know, she's like, "What's this for?" He goes, "Laptopping." And then that turns into, "You're spending too much money." He goes, "Oh, well, you gave away most of your trust fund to your parents." And then they stop themselves and they think, "Okay, no, this is not who I want to be. This is not who I am." So there's a lot of there's a lot about who they are and who they want to be, what they're meant to be, and that in turn brings up the conversation about control and what love is as a device of control. And you know, if you are in love with this other person, does that mean you turn into this other person? If you are in love with somebody, do you cease to be who you were? Does that enhance who you are? And or does love force you to fit within these narrow walls of the stereotype because that's only where love exists? To say the least, it confused me, and I was fascinated by it, because these people were trying so hard to not be stereotypical love, and they said, no, we've got our own thing, and they create their little treasure hunts, and they create their little inside jokes, and at the same time, those are all those stereotypical things that they were trying to avoid.
Yeah.
So was that them being in love with each other, or was that them faking it, and at the same time it might even just be completely falsified from Amy's perspective? But I get the sense that it's real because of the treasure hunt clues that play a very large role in the investigation. So anyway, I really like the way that it played with the effects of love, not just as an agent of control, but then progressing even further, like as a fetish, the way that Amy uses love to control the other men in her life, or the men that were in her life. You know, she gets restraining orders against some of her past boyfriends for things that they didn't do. You know, she makes up stories of rape and abuse and neglect, and these guys are puzzled by it. And she uses those stories that she tells as a means of controlling other people. And she uses it also as a means of controlling herself. It's also very possible that she's the sort of person who considers herself so dangerous that she has to keep other people away by demonizing them. And that, you know, this topic just keeps unfolding.
Right.
And the movie touches upon every aspect of it. And I'm thoroughly fascinated by it. We can get into it a little bit more, of course, in a bit. What I didn't like about the movie is pretty hard to pin down. I can't think of anything solid or concrete that I thought was lacking or anything that fell short. Fincher has become such a master of his own style. I recall Seven and Fight Club and Panic Room in particular being these really bombastic visual feasts. And as a kid and as a film student at the time, I was like, yeah, this is so cool. You know, he's really pushing the boundaries of cinematic visuals. And then I thought, as I neared the end of graduation, I was like, but they're almost masturbatory. You know, there's that shot in Panic Room where the camera goes through the handle of the teapot.
Right.
That for? You're just showing off. But that's it. I mean, Panic Room is otherwise a super taut thriller, and Fight Club is 2/3 a brilliant film, and then I think the last third falls apart for me. But since then, he's created The Social Network and Zodiac, and I don't find any fat in those movies. And the visual style is so subservient to the content of the film that I think he's done a really great job of minimizing his unchecked enthusiasm without crushing his ingenuity and his efficacy as a filmmaker. So what I didn't like about it is going to be harder to say because I think he's got such a strong hold on how he wants to make a movie and what precisely goes into it, that if there's something that doesn't fit, it has to reflect an incongruity in his philosophy on cinema, and I would have to watch the movie a couple more times to get a better handle on that. How about you? What are your likes and dislikes?
Likes and dislikes? Well, usually when I approach a film or I walk out of a theater, normally the first thing that I go to is just kind of searching within myself to see how the film affected me on an emotional level. And so I like that this film surprised me. I felt like the way that I discovered the film was, I mean, to be honest with you, like the name Gone Girl, nothing about that like appealed to me as like a movie goer. Like Ben Affleck, he's Ben Affleck. He's like a really solid actor right now, and I've enjoyed him in like the past handful of films that I've seen him in. But I just
me too.
I didn't know anything about this film as far like I wasn't able to anticipate it, and I went online to just kind of check reviews for it, you know, like, oh, a new Ben Affleck movie, see how it is, and I saw it got like a really high rating, and like one of the first things I read in the review was, if you don't know anything about this film, just go see it. Kind of like we told people at the beginning of this, you know, and so like unfortunately, as soon as you hear or read, if you don't know anything about this film, just go see it. It means that you already know that you're in store for some kind of like a plot twistiness, you know?
Right.
And so, unfortunately, I have the bad habit of waiting for it and anticipating and looking for it, you know? And so then, Gina, my wife, and I, we were sitting there watching the movie, and I kind of like lean over to her, and I'm like, oh, he totally did it. He just look at they're trying, you know. And then as the film went on, it became apparent to me that they were trying just a little bit too hard to play with your audience, with the audience's perception of whether or not he did or didn't do it. And so then when that twist rolls in where she's driving in the car and she's alive, I was like, oh my gosh, this movie just got so, and just watching where it was going to go from there. So in other words, I love everything that you're talking about as far as the way that it presented relationships and love and our perception of love on like a Hollywood scale versus, you know, what love is generally like for real people outside of like the silver screen and stuff like that. But I love that I was just able to get invested in this complicated, twisted world that these two characters had built for each other, that the state, and I don't know if it went to like the world, but then like got wrapped in. It was like every single aspect of this film, from the way it was shot to the performances of the characters, as we'll talk later a little bit, the soundtrack absorbed me, and not a single element of it ever brought me out of it, other than the fact that it was, for me, one of those films that was really fun. I try not to talk during movies, but I love that I could kind of like be like, you know, like say like, I think you did it, you know, blah blah blah, and the movie was an experience, both in and out of itself, and I feel like that's so rare to find nowadays, to just be floored by a piece of film, because of everything that's went into it and everything that you're getting out of it. As far as what I didn't like, kind of like you, not a whole lot to pick apart in that regard. One thing that we might touch on later was in regards to the film's third act, and in whether or not we could say it was, I don't know, a little bit long-breathed, or, you know, whether or not it just didn't flow right despite being arguably long. And I feel like that was the only thing that I had that kind of pulled on me a little bit in that regard, but overall the film was so good that I forgave it for any of those like inconsistencies in the end. In regards to this film, I feel like anything that I didn't like about it, it just felt like it would have been done on purpose. So it wasn't even,
right,
you know, more so just worth having a discussion about, like we're doing, versus being like, I didn't like the end of the film, it was too long, because I could instantly just counter myself by saying, no, this film flowed and was exactly as long as Fincher intended it to and the writer needed it to be, and they told the story that they wanted to tell, and it didn't feel like a traditional Hollywood film, like you were saying, and I loved it for that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't know. That sums it up for me. If you're ready, we can
let's
move on.
go.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then we have here the inciting question is being, were Nick and Amy in love? And then from there, what is love to these people? Man, that's right there. We're just like digging into the meat of it. So, yeah, so I ask you, what do you think love was to them, and were they in fact in love?
Yeah, I mean, I know I wrote this question, but I love this question.
Yeah. I'm just saying. I know I wrote it.
I'm just saying I wrote a brilliant question. I'm a smart guy.
Yeah.
No, I love it because it's the question I asked myself. It's the question I ask myself every time I watch a movie with a romance. I think, I'm not trying to undermine the movie, but I'm trying to access what the movie's trying to say about their relationship. And part of the reason I find it such an effective question is that in other movies where the love is shallow or stereotypical, you can't say much about it. You can't say that they were actually in love. You can say the writers told us they were in love. You can get movies where the two actors have really good chemistry, but there's no reason for them to be together. I feel like a good example of that is Scott Pilgrim. I like Michael Cera and I love Mary Elizabeth Winstead, but I felt like their characters had no reason to be together, and I felt like the movie made a really good argument for him and Knives Chow to be together, despite her similar, destructive behaviors in terms of romance. And that's a different conversation for another time. But my point is that when I asked that question of myself for Gone Girl, I came up with a really dark answer. Or not even an answer, but a really dark exploration about love. Because, of course, the movie starts out by convincing you that they are in love, and it does so through the very typical genre stereotypes of they meet at a party, and he sweeps her off her feet by being witty and clever, and it's surrounded by this sort of meta understanding of, culture about the beer. He wants her attention because she's got the last of the good beer at the party, and he's going to use that as an in to appeal to her personal preferences, and that's love. Liking the same beer for the same reasons, that's love. I don't know, but that's what a movie will tell you, right? And it sounds like garbage. And the funny thing is that I feel like that opening there with those two characters is fairly stilted, and I think it's on purpose because it's supposed to feel disingenuous.
Right.
And it's not disingenuous as, it doesn't come off as like a parody, but it comes off as like a rote conversation. These two already know the motions of this conversation. He's going to move in on her, she's going to respond happily, and then they go for their silly little walk around the city, and they're going to fall in love after coming up with a couple really cutesy things like the chin thing, and then he kisses her in a mist of sugar. God, this is ridiculous. You don't actually expect me to believe that this is real, and if it is real, and let's say those two people do fall in love at that moment, they've only known each other an evening. So what is love to somebody who falls in love that quickly? Can it disappear that quickly as well? Is it that transitory, or is it that unstable? And love as being unstable seems very believable when you take in the rest of the movie.
Yeah.
Because it's certain that at one point Nick falls out of love with her because he starts that affair with his student. It's then certain that she falls out of love with Nick because she tries to frame him for her murder. It's then uncertain if she falls back in love with him, although it seems very strongly suggested that she does because he taunts her on television and she's eating the ice cream in that scene where she's at Desi's place, right?
Yeah.
And her eyes go wide and she's leaning in ever closer, and then she eats Desi's ice cream, and Desi's like, whoa, what's going on here? I don't know.
Yeah.
Because Nick's playing ball with her. None of her other boyfriends played this game. She put them at a distance, and they stayed there. With Nick, he's suddenly just as twisted as she is. And so now they found some very fundamental commonality,
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
which
Yeah.
is a twisted place to find a commonality. But there it is. And so, does she fall back in love with him? Well, she very well may. She seems very set on being with him at the end of the movie, and she is pregnant with his kid. I'm not sure. I don't. Either I'm missing a part of the movie in my memory, or it's really questionable as to whether or not she's actually pregnant.
There was that whole part in the film, and Gina in the background might be able to clarify me on this if I butcher it. There was something information about him going to a sperm bank at one point because they were trying to have a kid maybe at one point.
That's right.
And she did something with the records there, and Gina led me to believe that at some point she sort of divulged that she went to that bank and actually finally had herself inseminated with the semen that he thought didn't exist anymore.
Mm-hmm. That sounds really familiar.
Okay.
I don't recall it exactly, but yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we find that I found that when I asked, are Nick and Amy in love, or were they in love, I had a really hard time answering that question because I could both say absolutely yes, because at times the movie said yes, they are in love, and it said they were in love at first because they have this very stereotypical rom-com style love, the sweet, charming, we fall in love in a mist of sugar, the kiss in an alley.
Yeah.
And then they have all these cute treasure hunts and little things that they do with each other. They have sex in a bookstore.
Right.
They buy each other the same gift for their anniversary. It's all very cute, and oh my gosh, they know each other so well. And even though it's very convincing in the movie, it's very boring in terms of a narrative, because it's like, yes, I guess in real life, if these two people experience that, it would. But what are these people like in their quiet moments?
Yeah.
when they're just sitting there, when one wants to read a book and the other wants to go out. How do they handle those situations? Like these episodes that we get in a movie, these little vignettes, they're very cute for that time being. But how does love exist, or how does love last over the course of a really long period of time? That, I think, is the toughest. The toughest trial for love to endure is not just how are we at our best, and not even how are we at our worst, but how are we in that really big, that really fat, neutral in-between area when there's just nothing to do. What do you do on lazy Saturday afternoons with some people?
That no movie or rarely a film ever tackles, or films like you were saying, like that are traditionally stereotypically about love and the meeting at the party and et cetera, et cetera. All that big part in the middle there is always shaved out. It's not shaved out, it's gutted.
It's gutted, yeah. It's like scooped away. And so I could say yes because the movie has given me a very strong, very typical, yes, they are in love because of these very cute things that they do. It's then very obvious that they're not in love because she frames him for murder, he cheats on her, and then they manipulate the hell out of each other throughout the rest of the movie. And then it's at the end of the movie where that manipulation brings them closer together. Yeah. And then you think, is that love? Is that their love?
So,
and if it is, man, what a dark place to be.
Yeah. I have a question for you that'll sort of kind of like kill two birds with one stone in a way. It'll kind of be my perception of this, but then also asking you how you feel, because it's a little bit different. And to be honest, I wasn't entirely sure how I was going to answer this question about whether they were or weren't in love, and kind of hearing you talk about all this stuff kind of is what sparked this for me. And so what I'm wondering is, if they were actually never in love, but rather they were two people who very much were in love individually with the idea of being in love, kind of like you were saying, like the whole party thing, could in any other movie would have come off as like a chintzy cliche scene where the guy with the beer and the blah blah blah. But the very fact that he's the guy with the beer who's approaching her and commenting on the kinds of guys with chins and beards that talk about other hipsters in the room, you know what I mean? It's like they were this. From the very moment they met, they always seemed to be fascinated by this idea of what they could be, of what they should be. And from the very moment they met, at least in according to I think her, based on like her diary entries and the overall narrative of the film, they were very much a case of opposites attracting. She was always she always came off as like I mean, they were both writers, but it was almost like the New York intellectual type versus the small town Missouri beer and pizza type, and they just both happen to have like writing in common and whatnot. And so it seems to me like I said, like they were in love with the idea of being in love, and almost like part of them could never quite figure out why they weren't able to click rather, and I feel like in a lot of cases of like opposites attract, like you were saying, it's so easy to you always have that spark, that like the sex in the library and the sugary misty kiss and stuff like that, but when it's the opposites attract thing, it is so hard to fill or be happy in those moments, those quiet moments, like you were saying, like going out versus reading a book and blah blah blah. And so therefore, if truly what they were was in love with this idea of how they could potentially or should potentially be in love, I'm wondering, therefore, if the first time that they ever truly fell in love wasn't when they both realized how twisted and controlling they both were, and through the events that transpired with her disappearing and trying to frame him and stuff like that. If the sick part is that kind of like you were alluding to a little bit, if that wasn't that first moment, as messed up as it sounds, that they were like, well, where they both found each other, and it was through these psychotic, sociopathic, elements of them that were coming out, that they were both the only ones who were, like truly like seeing that they actually did fall in love. And all those years prior to that, it was the idea of what they could be and what they should be, and because that was only an idea, they were never really in love.
Right. And it took them tearing that off of each other to discover who they were and discover that they really do love each other. And just to contextualize the movie in a different light, if we think of the ending as a happy ending, we can justify everything that happens in the movie using very dark means. But what that would mean is that the movie really is a love story. And it would mean that it's not a tale, although it involves a tale of psychopaths and manipulation, but that these are the trials, and maybe this is taking it from this perspective, it would be a grand metaphor to the trials that you have to go through to fall in love. That it doesn't happen and this is a great metaphor as well, that sugar mist that they experience behind the bakery, like that scene is way too sweet. Literally. So you have to get through that terrible, overly sugared nonsense, and you have to strip the horrible things away from each other to get down to the gritty, raw humanity that is your partner. And if you find that person is either just as sick and twisted or just as pure and good as you, then maybe you do fall in love. From that perspective, then it's a really good ending, because now they've both gotten what they want. Nick gets the baby. Remember, that was his issue. He wanted the kid, she didn't. And you do get the opposites attract thing all the same, because she's the well-educated, was it Harvard? I think Harvard, so. Harvard writer, and he is the like you said, like backwater. Although his parents live in a gorgeous house. But he's the country boy, and she's not.
Right.
She's in her brownstone, and he's in a palace in the woods. It's a fantastic. Yeah, I think you're right. I think what they have to do is they have to fall in love not with the construct of the other person, but with who the other person is.
Uh-huh.
And just because they're scary people doesn't mean it's any less love. It just means that love is more complicated than Hollywood formula.
Yeah.
And wouldn't that be closer to what we understand to be truth anyway? I mean, we know that fiction works in broad strokes anyway. that's just for brevity's sake. That's just to keep people's attention. It's for the neatness of a narrative. But reality is not nearly as clean.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So yeah, just oh man. Again, I guess just going to show the beauty of what they have achieved, like overall with the narrative, the fact that we can even have like this level of a conversation about, you know, one of the core components of what the story was comprised of is kind of blows my mind, you know.
Yeah, and this is why I'm still convinced that the movie's great, and this is what I think a great piece of art does, is that it's engaging, it's clear, it's accessible, and it's also very deep and very. It continues to open up the more you investigate into it. I think a bad piece of art runs out of material right away, or becomes inconsistent.
Yeah. Okay, so I think we both answered that. Let's move on to the next point here. You have written, and if you don't mind, I'll probably read off this bullet point here just to kind of like jog our memories, and maybe anybody who's listening or watching kind of have them see what we're talking about here. But you write, "Is love a cage?" And you explain that Amy wrote a story about feeling trapped by Nick. This was a guise to justify her suicide, or was it? Could her actions with Nick and past men be a reaction to her feeling trapped or obligated by affection? And it's kind of a mouthful.
Yeah.
But like I said, at the core of what you're asking here, is love a cage? And you mentioned, you know, that kind of the way the film is structured, that her diary passages, which are I think almost always like narrated by her, is kind of one of the key explorations of this idea in the film. And so, yeah, how do you feel about that? Do you think love is a cage? I mean, and I guess we can answer this. Correct me if I'm wrong. Both from do you want to answer this purely from observing the characters in the film, or do you want to talk about like personal experience in regards to this love and things like that, or how do you want to approach it?
Well, let's just see where it takes us.
Okay.
To begin with, it certainly seems like the characters feel First off, the characters feel love is a cage because they've defined it as something that they don't want to be in. Right? They see their friends who are in love and they don't want that love. But at the same time, they've fallen into it. Right? There's that scene where they buy each other the same gift for their anniversary, and she says, "We're so cute, I want to punch us in the face."
Yeah.
Like they are who they don't want to be, which is why it's not surprising at all when Nick becomes the disaffected husband and she becomes something of a nag, or at least she starts to hint at it, and he's only hinting at being disaffected anyway, until the morning of their 5th anniversary when it's absolutely certain, and she goes missing, and he's confused as hell. So for them, a type of love is a cage. The type of love that they don't want is a cage. But at the same time, Amy writes a really false story about their relationship. And that story is very believable, which is the scariest part of the movie for me, I think. That it was so easy for everyone to believe that Nick killed his wife, or that Nick kidnapped his wife. Nobody really questioned it. His sister didn't believe it in the first place because she's family, and the detective, the one whose job it is to question the situation, questioned it. But everyone else, the media, even Amy's parents, once they discovered that there was blood on the floor and then turned into a murder investigation, said, "Nope, he must have done it." So, we have this cookie-cutter, overly sweet perspective of love, and we've got those characters in it. But we're also ready at the drop of a hat to believe that love can sour so badly that one is willing to kill the other? Ugh. What we both love and hate love at the same time. We wouldn't, I think if anybody were asked, they said, "Oh, can love be a terrible thing? Can it turn to violence and that still be love?" And someone would say, "No. Love can only be a good thing for people, and it's something everybody wants, and it's in the psychological pyramid of necessities. The last and final one is to feel love and to feel affection and to feel accepted and to feel valuable amongst people who you also care about.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm so fascinated by the fact that we understand that to be love, and we also understand it to very, very easily transition to violence and hatred. It's not, it's very much in our collected colloquialisms to say that there's a fine line between love and hate, and this movie does a very good job of dancing across that line. Not only does it show us that one relationship of people who are in love can very quickly, or who are we're told we're in love, very quickly transition to hatred, but the movie does a very good job of playing with us going back and forth over it. Because Amy tells this story about Nick being an abusive husband, and of course, like I said, we believe that right away, and we see. Oh, at first, we don't think Nick could possibly be an abusive husband. He's the lazy guy who sits on the couch playing video games. Who would believe him as an abusive husband? But at the same time, we also see him as a fairly neglectful husband because he doesn't know her friends, he doesn't know her hobbies. He says, "Oh, I think she sits around and reads all day," and Kim Dickens, the detective, is like, "Yeah, but I don't know anyone who can read all day every day."
Yeah.
And so once, and it's even in that scene when he discovers that his dad is in the police station and they haven't been able to get a hold of him, and he gets mad at the cop and he gets angry and he slams the table, right? And you get that really, and this is where Fincher shines. Fincher is so good at turning the emotion of a scene on a dime.
Mm-hmm.
And it reminded me so much of Zodiac when Robert Graysmith goes to speak to, I can't remember his name, but he's this guy who has the movie posters. And the movie posters were supposed to have been written by the killer. And Robert Graysmith is like, no. This guy, Rick, I think, he drew the posters, and he's the killer. His handwriting matches the killer, and the guy in the house goes, "I'm sorry, Mr. Graysmith. Rick didn't draw those posters. I did." And the movie comes to a stop. And you think, oh my God, Graysmith is sitting across the table from the killer.
Yeah.
And then the guy goes, "Oh, would you like me to get the schedule for the theater? I have the schedule in my basement." And then Robert Graysmith recalls that the killer had a basement, and there aren't very many basements in California.
Yeah.
So he's not only sitting across from the guy with the handwriting that matches the killer, he's sitting across from the guy who has a basement in California. And like, these two things don't line up normally. And so the movie just, it goes on a dime. You're with him with his obsession and with his over attention to detail,
Mm-hmm.
and then all of a sudden you're scared for his life. And Gone Girl does the same thing, where we're puzzled. We're like, how does a guy not know his wife's friends or what she does all day? How does he not know anything about her? And then you're like, well, he didn't do it. Of course he didn't, because he's a baby. And then all of a sudden he slams the thing down, he shows he's got a temper, and he's yelling at a cop, and you think, maybe he's got it in him.
Yeah.
And then later she tells a story about him throwing her against the railing, and then she buys a gun because she's scared of him, and you think, maybe this is what, maybe it's true. Maybe it's adding up. And so the movie keeps going back and forth, and then, of course, we get to the point where we realize that she's the craziest of them all. And you think,
yeah,
no, this story that she's told didn't come from his abuse. It's not. It doesn't. It doesn't come from his actions against her, not his physical actions against her. He's not an abusive husband in a violent way, anyhow. So trying to figure out where her cage comes from is very confusing, because it seems like if she is told, or she believes, or is led to believe that she's in this cage of affection, that she has to get out, right? That even if it's a perfectly ideal cage, as it was at Desi's place, Desi goes through all the things that are in his house. He's got this sort of television, he's got this sort of wine, he buys her clothes. It's a lake house, I think cottage, and this was like the most opulent house I've ever seen in my life. So he's put her in this beautiful, beautiful cage. But because it's a cage, she feels she has to get out. And I think that that's a great metaphor, a great symbol of how she feels trapped even emotionally in what would otherwise be a loving relationship. So, yeah. So I think she feels obligated to feel love when she's in these situations, and maybe she doesn't. Maybe she's never been in love before someone like Nick plays ball, and
Yeah.
before he turns out to be just as manipulative as her. How about, yeah. I mean,
No, it's so much good stuff. I probably to answer the question is love a cage. Um, you've already answered it from the angle of the characters in the film, so I'm going to kind of draw a parallel with that while also kind of off the top of my head, just
okay.
giving an answer to it. And I think that as somebody who is, Gina and I have been together for about 3 years now this October, and we've been married since April, so May, June, July, August, or, you know, a handful of months now and stuff like
You
that.
don't know that off the top of your head, Matt?
And as much as I'd like to say no, it's not. Yeah, I do. I think it is, but I think what separates certain people and certain relationships, separates might not be the right word. I guess what I'm getting at is it's most definitely a cage, and I think at best it's a cage you build for yourselves together.
Mm.
Um, and I think a lot of what that cage is meant to do, ideally, is meant to protect each other. I think it's meant to protect the relationship from kind of like outside sources and sort of like penetration in that regard from the various things that can, if you don't build a cage, you probably build a bubble, and the bubble's too easily popped, and so you sort of
Mm-hmm.
like build that cage. And I think that unfortunately, the problem that a lot of people fall into is that they fall into relationships where instead of building the cage together, one person's often insecure, and so that one person on their own begins building a cage around the other person, and then so
Mm.
one person trapped in
Yeah.
a cage, and not the other person, and that becomes unfair too. If you're not sitting in it mutually, and it's not a house you built together, that's problems right there. And so in the case of Amy and Nick, it almost seems like instead of going through the motions of having conversations and whatnot, in regards to potentially building this cage together. And maybe this goes back to the idea of them loving the idea of being in love. It just seems like the cage, I guess obviously, it never got built because so many aspects of that relationship for so long seemed like they were chaos and tit for tat and back and forth, and it turned into arguments
Yeah.
about money and kids and all sorts of different stuff. And when you're, and not that those same arguments can't happen inside the cage that you build together, and I think that many times they do, but I also think that sometimes it's the security of that cage that you built together that helps you survive those kinds of like inevitable confrontations in any kind of a serious relationship together. And for two people, Nick and Amy, who supposedly, kind of like you're saying, don't like the idea of even ever having to build this cage. Like, no, a relationship shouldn't be like that. I don't care how many Hollywood movies or stories have told us that, like, that love is this free thing, and that our friends don't get how
Love will
quickly
set
they.
you free.
Yeah. What is more freeing for a couple than in the end of the film, like just having everything about your lives exposed out in the open, like that's interesting, like can
Yeah.
they ever even have a cage now for the rest of their lives? It's almost like they, in their sicknesses, destroyed all potential for ever realistically having a chance to build anything like that together.
No, I think you should continue with what you were saying before.
What?
With love as a cage that you build for each other.
Okay.
Um, because I think this is brilliant. I think you've brought up a really great and consistent with the themes of the movie, really great metaphor. Instead of importing a love cage wholesale, like they hated before, right? The stereotypical rom-com love.
Right.
What they do throughout the course of the movie is they bear themselves to each other, which is something that we understand love to be reliant upon. You can't be lying to your significant other. You can't be false to them, otherwise it falls apart or it becomes poison or acerbic and it just eats away at the relationship. So by the end of the movie, what they've done is they have thoroughly exposed themselves to each other.
Right.
The darkest parts of who they are, right? She is a manipulative sociopath. He is also a manipulative sociopath.
Yeah.
Maybe not to the same degree. He didn't kill a person.
Yeah, you're right. There's different levels here.
He didn't plot to kill himself and frame her for the murder. I think it's pretty fair to say that the scales tipped in her favor in terms of who is the more extreme sociopath. But he has proved that he knows how to work with her, and he knows how to work her madness. And in the same way that a couple in love deserve each other at their best, it's often said that it's only when they know how to handle each other at their worst that is deserved, that is earned. And this movie's them at their worst. And so by the end of the movie, what they've done is they've exposed themselves, and they have built for them the construct of their own cage.
Oh, so you think so? So you think that by the end they have accidentally done what they set out to never do?
Well, I think what they've done is they've taken your advice inadvertently, and they've built their own cage. And maybe they don't know it.
Okay.
But they know their boundaries now. And they know the reasons for their desperate actions. And so I don't know that love set them free, but they know and they have tangible in-world bounds. They can't ever tell the public precisely what happened, right? So that information then acts as a frame for their cage. They know that within these bounds, that's where they have to exist as a couple. And if they can play by those rules, then they're going to have a really good relationship.
Yeah.
Because outside that cage, it's really dangerous. And like you said, and like even I said, if love is not meant to protect the two who are in love or the multiple people who are in love, we'll leave polygamy as an option on the table, then what good is it? So their love, they're really twisted circumstances, but their love protects them within these confines.
Wow. It's interesting. But before you said all of this, there was a part of me that wondered if one of the reasons why these two people could never be placed in a cage together is because they will inevitably one of them will kill the other person, just because like the whole idea of being, we'll say, trapped in a cage with no lock, like together, and it will eventually happen. But now that you bring this up, and you're talking about how they've built it because they share this information that can never be shared outside of it and whatnot, it's almost like I feel like I might have been wrong about that entire thought chain, in that this cage, based on this information and these secrets, is, oh man, like maybe they won't kill each other. They can't, because then they'll expose one of oh man, my mind is like melting.
But even that thought, the two people in a cage will eventually kill each other. We understand that to be the case with love anyway. Like I said earlier, for whatever reason, we readily accept that one spouse is capable and willing to kill the other immediately. And it's so common knowledge that it's the first thing any of the detectives or anyone thinks. Amy goes missing, they think the husband did it. The husband is suspect number one. And that's true if the husband goes missing, or if the husband is found dead. Like the person you are closest to is the one that is immediately the suspect if any harm comes to you. And how twisted is that? It's even reflected in Fight Club. In the opening, he says, you know how people always say you hurt the ones you love? Well, it works both ways.
Wow.
So that's obviously a theme that Fincher likes.
Yeah, now it's like now I gotta tell Gina, like you can never actually be abducted or kidnapped or anything horrifying. I probably should never joke around about that. Oh, like that's terrible. You're right. This movie is scaring me now. Darn it.
It's scary. It's a really dark movie, and I really like what happens if you try and think of the ending. It's a happy ending.
Oh man. Okay.
Yeah. And yeah, I know we're going off that outline there, but if there's anything you feel like we've already answered or we don't need to go through, feel free to skip it.
Oh well. I mean, can we settle to? Can we say we've tackled Is Love a Cage? I feel like we've tackled
I think
it as
so.
good as we can.
I think we've had a very successful conversation about it.
Yeah. I mean, we have here next. You said in case we need to recap. Before hitting on the pacing and the visuals and the music and the performance. Just that the major themes in this film are love, hate, and control, and then within control, manipulation. Then the film also tackles desperation and fetishism.
Oh yeah.
I mean, that's a lot to gloss over.
Sure.
I mean, do you have? I mean, we've already talked on love in great detail, and I think control also, desperation. We defined prior to recording this, or we looked up the definition to fetishism, and I kind of want to touch on it just
Sure.
a little bit, because like we were saying, the scene. What is her ex? What is the Neil Patrick Harris character's name in this? Was it
Desi.
Desi.
Like Desi Arnaz.
Yeah, because I mean, we can talk about this maybe when we go on to the visuals, but the scene where she kills him basically bathes in the blood that's pouring out of his slit neck on the bed and then rolls around in it like a dog.
Yeah.
Is I just is that part of the fetishism? Can you define that for me again?
Sure. TheFreeDictionary.com gives us 3 primary definitions. First one is worship or belief in magical fetishes, and in that case, there's actually a device, or not a device, but like a symbol, a physical symbol that people will use that is their fetish.
Oh.
Sort of like in Inception, the little device that you had to remind yourself how to get out of the dream was called a fetish. So that's a magical fetish in that respect. The other 2 definitions are excessive attachment or regard. So anything that you find yourself particularly affected by, you have a fetish for, I don't know, cat pictures. And then also the one that we're actually probably most commonly familiar with is number 3, which is the displacement of sexual arousal or gratification to a fetish. So in that case, it's whatever floats your boat, so to speak.
Do you think after the film ends and we can no longer be a part of these people's lives, that Nick is in any real danger of having a Desi pulled on him?
Yes. In fact, I think he's in constant danger of that, because I think if at any point Amy feels as though that cage has become a trap as opposed to a personal artifice to their affection. If at any point Amy feels like Nick has fallen back or becomes the man that she didn't love before, if at any point she's convinced of that, I think she'll fall right back to her old tactics. I think she'll go, I don't know if she'll jump right back into murder-suicide thing, or if she will go back to the restraining order or fake rape, or false stories of abuse. I don't know which one she'll do next. Yeah. But I think the reason that most people identify the end of that movie as dark is that they are both constantly at risk of each other. And it's true that by the end of the movie, Nick is a violent guy. He slams her against the wall. Another great visual from Fincher. He slams her against the wall, and you hear that head. You hear her head hit the wall. Yeah. And it's shocking, because the whole movie, let's face it, part of you is kind of going, man, I hope he gets his hands around her neck, because what she's doing is frustrating. And you're like, at this point, she deserves to be violently killed.
Yeah.
There's a part of like that revenge justice going in your head. You're like, man. And so when he slams her against the wall, you think, or when you think that scene's coming, you're like, yeah, he's gonna slam her, and then it actually happens, and you go, man, that's horrifying.
Yeah.
That was a really scary thing to do to somebody.
Interestingly enough, you were saying that earlier on in the film when I forget you said that he like slams his hand down on a table when he's talking with like the police officers and whatnot, and
Mm-hmm.
that was one of the first times in the film that you were hit with that like, whoa, maybe this guy's not all he's cracked up to be, kind of feelings. For some reason, I don't remember being hit with that feeling, like there in the police station. Probably at that point, I think I was just still sympathizing with him too much as a frustrated husband who was, in the process of being wrongly accused for all this stuff. Because at that point in the film, I didn't know what the movie was going to be about. I didn't know, if it was going to be a film about him going and getting the death penalty, that sort of thing. And so I was too much like, well, yeah, of course he's angry. This whole thing is out of control and ridiculous, and something's going on. Anyways, my point is that when he slammed her against the wall at the end of the film, I think that might have been that first time where I was actually hit with that feeling of just, oh wow. And then because that was so late in the film, it's like in the last like minute or two of the movie that happens, I was hit with that feeling of needing to replay like everything he said or did or everything we knew about him in my mind, to really evaluate how much we even knew him as a character, and then what was true and false from her diary entries and all that. It was like, it's one of those movies where I bet you anything, and I bet you'll agree that like watching that film for a second time is probably going to reveal so many things about both of their characters, but especially him. We're going to pick up on things a lot sooner.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that scene also, just by contrast, I mean, I felt like the movie planted the seed that he could be a violent person really early on.
Okay, yeah. Sometimes I'm dense when it comes to that kind of stuff.
No. It's fine, because he had a very justified reason for being angry.
Uh-huh.
His dad, he's got probably Alzheimer's or something along those lines, or dementia, so him being out of the house is a really scary thing for his dad, and he needed to get home, and he had just been in the next room, for hours. He'd been down the hall, and they couldn't find him. They didn't even bother to check the sheet to see, whatever. So he's mad. He's upset. His dad's life is at risk. It's a reasonable reason to get angry. But at the same time, he's really angry, and and Affleck does a pretty good job of being right at that edge of too angry.
Okay.
And later in the movie, when Nick slams Amy against the wall, she doesn't blink.
No, like she's used
eye contact.
Like she's used to it.
She's used to it, but I hate to say it, I think she likes it.
Okay.
I'm not gonna say like she likes physical violence. She likes being punched or anything like that, but she likes the aggressive Nick. She likes the guy who's willing to stand up for himself. She likes the guy who is willing to fight for himself. And she sees that in him. And we have all these cliches about the person who loves you the most sees you for who you really are. And maybe she's seeing him for who he really is.
Oh, man. Yeah.
And so, in the beginning, when he's only sort of too angry, we think, he's got this seed of too much in him. He's too aggressive. And then at the end of the movie, when we see he's fully aggressive, and then we think, oh, she's fallen in love with this Nick, because this is the Nick she really wanted.
Interesting, yeah.
It's a dark place to be. It's not what I think anybody would consider a healthy relationship.
Yeah,
it might be the way that love works.
Yeah.
Because love is just a word that we've created to describe a really powerful emotion that nobody else can define under any other word. And so we can't lock it into a singular image, which we get in this movie as the overly sweet romance. By the end of the movie, it's stripped away, it's bare, it's raw, and we see affection for two people who are horrible people I don't even like finishing that thought. But we see the affection for two horrible people loving what is horrible about each other. And at the same time, even the way I described it, it just dawned on me now. She may fall in love with a guy who's strong and who's smart, because his deception or his taunting on TV was really clever. So she loves that. And in turn, he might love her because she's also strong. She's also clever, and she's resourceful. And, I mean, I don't know if there's any sort of manipulation fetish. And this is where fetish would come into play, right? Because people are turned on by a whole, like sexually turned on by a whole variety. There's Rule 34 on the internet, which is if there's a fetish for it, there's a porn for it.
Yeah.
And so you can't put limits on what people are aroused by. And so if there is somebody, and there are, who's aroused by physical violence, it's also possible to say that there is love that can be found in that same fetish. Which sounds terrible, but it might be true. And it would be really unfortunate and really judgmental and like denigrating to prohibit somebody from experiencing love, which we understand to be a vital component to a healthy life.
Yeah.
By loving it on their own terms, which is a major theme of Citizen Kane.
Now that you point all this out, also, I'm wondering if not that remember in the middle of the movie when Affleck's character Nick, when he goes and he talks with one of Amy's other exes, who she basically destroyed the life of by framing him as a child molester.
Yeah, a molester of some kind.
Okay, well, a molester of
whether it was against her or against someone else, I can't
recall.
Oh
yeah, okay, yeah.
But she put a restraining order on him, and he can't get a job.
Yeah, because he's on like the lists of, like can't go within X amount of miles of school radiuses and things like that. Yeah, she did all sorts of stuff like that to him, and he seemed like his life has been hell ever since. I wonder if then if he was a case of bumping into her obviously a lot earlier on in life, when maybe she was exploring or had known for a while that she had a fetish for this sort of like destructive behavior in like destroying other people's lives and stuff like that, and he's an example of what potentially happens to somebody who cannot match her blow for blow, whereas Nick is the first person who actually survived it, which is really interesting.
Yeah, I think that's exactly the case. And Desi's a similar case too,
sort of.
Well, I mean, he's successful later in life.
Okay.
And so his life isn't ruined by her, but and he's kept in touch with her, but she definitely, I can't recall the exact details, but she dumped him under horrible circumstances, and unlike the other guy, he's always been in love with her. The first guy discounted her. He was like, she's crazy, stay away from her. And Desi says, no, I'm still in love with her, which is why when she comes back to him, he lavishes gifts upon her, And at the same time, and this is another argument for why love is a cage, he's telling her what to do. He's saying that you have to stay in the house. I'm watching you every minute of the day. Here are the clothes you're going to wear. Here's the food you can eat. And he immediately assumes that they're going to be in a relationship together. He's like, oh, Desi and Amy, back again. And it's really, he leaps into that persona immediately. He can't match her blow for blow. What he does is he builds the elaborate cage that she doesn't want. So when she gets to Nick, who, they're denying the cage, but they're in it anyway, and she can see that. But by the end of the movie, he matches her. He plays her game, and we all know, being video gamers, that the best matches are the ones where you're equally matched.
Yes, yeah.
As opposed to the ones where you blow the other person away or the ones where you get stomped.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it's true of less violent characteristics. If you are in a relationship with someone who thinks about cinema in these really abstract ways, and the other person can't even grasp it, Like even non-judgmentally, that's a difficult relationship to manage because what do you talk about? You know, you have to match each other.
Yeah.
You have to, or at least you have to be able to work with each other. And these other guys couldn't. And all of a sudden, Nick can, when previously he couldn't. So this is something she drew out of him.
And I wonder if she expected it or not. It's almost like now I'm wondering if it wasn't like the final test.
I think, just going out on a limb, I think in the end it was not expected. I think she fully expected to kill herself and frame him for her suicide as a murder. And I have no idea why someone would go to such lengths to do that. But that just shows the extent of her madness. And so I think when she saw him on television firing back at her, that's why she was sitting there wide-eyed, leaning forward, eating that ice cream, and not, and taking it. She was indulging in the sweetness of his retaliation.
She was falling in love with him for the first time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Which is a scary thought, but her fetish then just might be someone who can go with her, blow for blow.
Crazy and crazy.
Scary.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we have here, the potential to talk about like the pacing and the visuals and the music and the performances and stuff like that. I mean, do you in fact want to go over that stuff, or do you want to have kept this like a more, I don't know if philosophical is the right word, but like that type of conversation?
Well, I put pacing and visuals at the end, mostly because I figured it would be a good wrap up. But okay. I don't have anything in particular to say about the visuals that didn't come up in the conversation, which wasn't too much.
Yeah, this is a well shot David Fincher film, right?
Yeah, it's funny since I think basically since Zodiac, we've come to know a very different David Fincher. He doesn't have cameras fly through coffee pot handles anymore or teapot handles anymore. There isn't a shot orbiting the garbage can trash. He doesn't build the giant sets like he did in Seven. And I think it's all for the better. He's still a master of special effects, and I think his brilliance is now the subtlety with which he uses special effects. There's the special features on the Zodiac DVD or Blu-ray are particularly elucidating when it comes to just how subtly he injects special effects into his movies. The scene at Washington and Cherry when the Zodiac killer kills the cab driver. There are a couple shots where it's really obvious that they're on set, but then the rest of the shots are like, yeah, they're in the neighborhood. It's cool, it's a live, on the scene production at that point. Mm-hmm. And then in the special features, they tell you that he CG'd like half the houses in the background as they walk past him. And those are CG houses because that particular intersection didn't look the same anymore.
Yeah.
What? The opening shot is entirely CG. Not the opening shot, but the shot as it's coming up over the San Francisco Bay. Uh-huh. CG, the whole thing. It looks perfect, but
yeah,
it's CG. So I have no idea what special effects he snuck into Gone Girl because it looked perfect. It looked like a perfectly practical set, but it's very likely that he has snuck in something digital that I did not expect. And there's a certain amount of it in all modern film anyway, just to clean up things that you used to not be able to clean up, or things that you would have to go back and reshoot, and you can save a lot of money and time and hassle by just touching it up digitally.
Yeah.
As for the visuals on a whole, he's become much more austere, and Gone Girl's no different. I've fallen in love with the visual style of Zodiac, and I'll have to see Gone Girl a couple more times to really get a sense for what works and what doesn't work. But I recall two shots. It's actually one shot that's repeated. The shot when Nick first gets the text message from his special lady friend, whose name I can't recall, from his mistress. She says she's outside, and this is before we know he has a mistress. And she says, "I'm outside," and you're like, "Is that Amy? Is she playing this ridiculous game on him?" And the camera goes to the front door, and he opens the door, and the camera backs out and turns the corner very slightly. And so you're thinking, there's somebody around the corner. He does this brilliant perspective shift where you're watching Nick, and you're like, man, what's he seeing? And then all of a sudden, you're from the perspective of the ghost person.
Yeah.
Ghost, what's around the corner, and that shot changes the tone of the scene tremendously. We then get that same shot when Amy opens the door at her cottage, and she gets robbed.
Oh.
I haven't thought too much about what that means thematically, other than, of course, they're both instances where the character is stripped bare.
Okay.
You know, I mean,
Yeah.
it complicates Nick's life and it complicates her life, but it shows that at their base that they're just these people. They're scared. There's probably more to it, though. I haven't thought much about it.
Oh man, yeah.
But all that said, I mean, it's pretty clear that Fincher's got a distinctive visual style that he's working with, and watching the movie a couple more times might reveal that to me, or might reveal stronger connections.
Yeah.
Anything you wanted to say?
No, not really. I feel like the funny thing about David Fincher is I've seen a lot of his films, and I have also not seen a lot of his films, but especially Social Network, Dragon Tattoo, like now this. So that's his past 3 in a row, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that I felt like I could tell that he was working with like the same cinematographer and stuff like that in all of his films. Like he uses a very similar color palette against them. It's the way he uses greens and yellows and the way he desaturates, even those to a certain extent and whatnot. He's gotten to that point, and maybe he's been there for a really long time, where like a David Fincher film feels like a David Fincher film to me. And I appreciated that about this, and just kind of like his consistency and whatnot. And it'll be interesting to see what he does next, like if he actually keeps with that, or if he decides to do something different for the sake of doing something different.
Yeah.
Yeah, so nothing like visuals. I think one of the things I kind of picked up on throughout the film, I don't know if it took me out of it, but it was just because I was so floored by it, kind of talking about the subtleties of each shot and kind of how he's a master of this type of storytelling and stuff like that. Now, every single character in his film is a character, and I feel like, as weird as that sounds to say that, you can't say that about every film. I remember, I think it was a shot in the police station, and there's a janitor mopping the floor as kind of like two, I don't know if it's Affleck's character, or 2 people are leaving, probably Affleck's character and maybe his sister or something like that. That guy's mopping, and I think he has a line or something like that, and it was just reminded me of how he uses up like this space.
Yeah.
In each one of his shots, and the way that it's framed, and who he populates it with so perfectly. It's neither overdone or underdone, and I'm just blown away by the artistry that goes into making decisions like that and then casting it all, and I loved it.
Yeah, he's known for being a meticulous director.
Mm.
There's a bit of trivia on the IMDb site that says that Ben Affleck wanted to challenge this meticulousness, and so he bet some of the crew members that he could change the settings on the camera and David Fincher wouldn't notice. And so what he did is he went up, and it sounds like what he did is he adjusted the aperture ring just slightly,
mm-hmm.
and moments later Fincher turned around and said, "Why is the camera dim?"
Oh wow, yeah.
Yeah. Affleck was like, it was the most minute adjustment he could have made, and Fincher noticed immediately.
He seems like the kind of the director, like in the case with the janitor, or probably even the news reporters and the backgrounds of his scenes and stuff like that, who probably, I don't know if this is true or not, I can imagine him somehow letting those people know, the quote-unquote extras in the film, that it's like, you are in a certain regard in a David Fincher film just as important as the principal actors. Like, know that you live in and exist in this space also, and being in that mindset when I'm filming you is going to help sell this more than you guys will ever know. And that's what happens.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's right. I think he's that kind of guy.
But I don't know him. I know he makes amazing films, and he has for years now. So. Yeah,
we're going on 2 decades.
Yeah. Aside from Alien 3, which Gina likes. It's like her favorite Alien film, I think, is Oh, it's not? Oh, okay, anyways.
I was actually thinking of rewatching Alien 3 just to reacclimate myself to the movie because it's been a long time since I've seen it. I'm not really a fan of the Aliens movies, but I do have
Oh,
a
okay.
weird interest in them.
Yeah.
Um, and since I am such a fan of David Fincher, I'd like to go back and see what it looks like, what a mutilated David Fincher picture looks like.
Yeah, it's horrible. We did the oh man, it's getting off topic. Anyways, we did the quadrilogy not too long ago.
Yeah,
One is still the masterpiece, like out
sure.
of all of them. Anyways, I digress. I mean, music. I just the music in Gone Girl. I loved it. Reznor. I'm a big fan of his. Not like a hardcore fan or whatever, but I don't know. There's a certain mystique about that guy.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. I
as an
remember really
artist
liking the
and
soundtrack for The Social Network.
yeah.
Um, and I remember my friend after he won the Academy Award for that movie, thinking, she said on Facebook, she goes, something I thought I would never say. Trent Reznor, Academy Award winner.
Wow. Yeah.
And yeah, I think that's just evidence that a new generation has taken over Hollywood.
Hmm.
People who respect artists like Trent Reznor as opposed to just your typical John Williams orchestral scores.
Yeah.
And it's telling that Fincher is the guy that started with him. Like I said, I'm pretty sure Trent Reznor had music in Seven for the opening sequence or the title sequence. So um, yeah, Fincher's been with Trent for a long time, and it's cool to see him not just work with him, but continue to evolve their relationship.
Yeah. I guess versus the social network, I feel like the best way that I can describe this soundtrack by comparison is it felt very dreamy. It
Mm.
aided in just kind of like the film feeling just like this waking nightmare, I guess is the best way that I can put it.
And
Yeah.
that's probably very appropriate for the movie.
Yeah. Um, in performance-wise and whatnot, uh, I don't know. I just thought it was all really good across the board. There's a part of me every single time I watch a film with Ben Affleck in it that it takes me just a little bit of time to get Ben Affleck out of my mind and to like see Nick. But I've grown to respect him over the years, for the kinds of performances that he's chosen to take on and what he's done with them and whatnot. How about you, as far as the performances in the film?
Yeah, I thought they were all good. I didn't think there was anything standoutish. At the same time, I don't think there was anything that detracted from the movie. I was shocked that Tyler Perry was so likable.
Yeah, yeah.
I have not seen any of his movies, and I didn't expect him to be um, that tasteful.
Hmm. Right.
At the same time, I wouldn't have expected Fincher to accept anything less than that. So I was really impressed with Tyler Perry, um, but that was just because I had fairly insulting expectations, I think. And I didn't know he was in the movie. I saw the opening credits and I was like, that's probably a different Tyler Perry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Here, hang on
Um,
1 second. I gotta go to the bathroom so bad. We
yeah.
did this that one podcast. I don't know why my bladder's so small.
Go for it.
All right, I'll be right back. It turns out my bladder's not small. It's just that it can only hold a single gallon of water. Um, anyways, you were saying that the thing with Tyler Perry was that you how did you word you had you say insulting?
Yeah, I had insultingly low expectations.
That's a way to put it.
I mean, none of his movies have appealed to me in the slightest. They've all come off, all the Medea movies and everything else I've seen, all the trailers for his movies come off as like third-rate Eddie Murphy movies. Where
Oh
he's just,
man.
he's just like dressing up in different costumes and slapping around really cliched, OMG jokes, and it doesn't appeal to me even slightly. And I'm actually really glad that he makes so many movies, because it's proof that someone can exist completely outside of Hollywood's influence. Because he funds his movies, if I'm not mistaken, like almost entirely on his own. He gets funding from independent sources, and he distributes them on his own. And I have a huge respect for someone's ability to do that. That just doesn't mean I like your work. It's like Woody Allen. He makes a movie every year. You have to be impressed with that sort of resourcefulness and that endurance, but that doesn't mean I like every Woody Allen movie.
Right. Yeah.
Although I did recently see Blue Jasmine, and it's great.
Okay.
But,
all right, so Gone Girl, we hit on. I mean, really, the only thing we have yet to tackle here is, after this conversation, has your opinion of the film changed?
I wouldn't say it's changed, but I'd say it's greatly enhanced.
Yeah, same here.
I'm really fascinated by what you put forth in terms of not just love as a cage, but love as a cage that you build for yourself, and how that represents the place that Amy and Nick end up at the end of the movie. Though I had considered, and pretty well been convinced by the fact, or my belief, that Amy and Nick do fall in love at the end, or there is some kind of love at the end, despite how dark and twisted and sick it seems. It's better contextualized when I consider that it's something that they've built for each other, that it's a trial that they've gone through, and that even though it's a dark place to end up, that it may be a healthy relationship for them, despite the fact that it's on a razor's edge. But yeah, it might just be and isn't that love anyway? Isn't love a careful balance?
Yeah.
Seems like I can keep asking these questions, and so.
Yeah, we can talk about it forever. Yeah.
So how about you? Has your opinion changed at all?
Like you, and like I mentioned, it's been enhanced. I love the fact that we were able to have this conversation. It makes me want to watch the film again, like that much more, just to kind of look for, all the things that we talked about, some of the things that you brought up thematically and whatnot. Like I was telling you beforehand, it's been a really long time since I've had like this deep of a conversation about a film.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I'm just excited to watch it that second time that much more. And
Me too.
I'll probably end up, actually, as strange as this sounds, at some point watching this. Just so as weird as it sounds, just to hear everything you had to say about it all. Like, oh man, I'm looking back here at this outline, and like you were saying, is love a cage and whatnot, and that part that I brought up, but then everything that you were saying, ahead of time in regards to the level at which they each felt even trapped by their preconceived notions of what this love of theirs was supposed to be, based on society's perceptions of love, and what their friends and family's perceptions of their love was, going to end up being. And we're just like, oh man, this movie blows my mind, the conversation blows my mind, and it's been a privilege.
Yeah, it's been quite a pleasure.
Yeah.
So, any other final thoughts? Because I'm good.
No, it says here we have a viewer. I don't know who that viewer is.
Oh, hey.
Are you watching us, Gina? She's not watching us. It's somebody we don't know.
Cool.
Anyways, yeah. Any closing comments then? I guess closing comments would be, has our opinion changed? We both know.
No closing comments, but if you're the person who decided to watch or listen to this podcast that didn't see the movie, I hope you want to go see the movie now.
Yeah, if that's one thing we can close with. Right? If you didn't heed our advice, man, and you listened to this or watched this without having gone and seen the movie, man, what are you doing?
Go see the movie.
Yeah. Films like this, they don't come around nearly as often as I wish they would,
Yeah.
which says a lot. I went and saw Guardians of the Galaxy. Oh, no, you know what? We're gonna.
Yeah,
No.
let's not get into Guardians
Yeah,
after
no.
Gone
I
Girl.
was just it was just the difference between, like I was saying, watching a movie for like purely the entertainment value of it versus going and seeing a film like this a second time, and you achieve completely different things by going to do it. Um, yeah.
Definitely.
Okay.
Two types of movies.
How dare me for almost bringing up Guardians during this podcast?
Yeah, you can have two GG movies in one podcast.
Oh my gosh! Oh my gosh! We need to just hang this up.
All right. Well, then I'll start it. I'm Scott William Hannon for 30 and Nerdy. You can find me at SW Hannon on Twitter and as well on Facebook and Instagram and LO, and that might be it.
Yeah. Scott, thank you for outlining this. Your outline was awesome, and it was a really big help. And man, if you guys haven't yet, Scott's written review, also a very thought-provoking piece, spoiler-free as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
Or
as best as I could.
Yeah, it can also be found on 30andnerdy.com. When you write this stuff, I know I put it on 30 and Nerdy. Do you link it on like a personal blog or a Google Plus or Facebook or anything else where other people can find it, or?
I usually throw it up on Facebook and Twitter and Google Plus.
Okay, cool, awesome, yeah. So it's floating around out there. So for 30andnerdy.com, my name is Matt Sternad. You can find me on Twitter at 30andnerdy. We also have, like I said, 30andnerdy.com, facebook.com/. Anyways, we're on Facebook. We've got the Google Plus page where usually these videos go to and stuff like that. Not much other content. We got Instagram and all that other kind of stuff also. But this has been our Gone Girl Spoilercast Conversation, and I hope you guys liked it because I thought it was awesome.
Yeah, I had a really good time.
Thanks for sticking around. Yeah. All right, cool. I'll stop the broadcast here, but then just hang out for a second, okay?
Sure.
All right. Thanks, everyone.